Can you see it now?
Is writing loading, so I guess. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, yeah, I'll just keep it. I'll just keep it like this. This works. Okay. This works. And so, but like I was saying, guys, I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. Thank you so much for your patience. But this is me. This is me. I got a chance to study the Bible with some of these guys who are awesome. Some of my close friends now to this day. And I met them at FIU, got to study the Bible, and it really changed my heart. It really showed me who God was. It really showed me the power that he has. And one of the biggest things for me, guys, was that I couldn't stop smoking. I used to smoke a lot. And I was like, maybe I should study the Bible and smoke and stop smoking. But I learned so much more. I learned that Jesus is great. He's awesome. And I honestly would never forget this day ever, right? And I got a scripture right here, how it says, Romans 10, if you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God has raised from the dead, you will be saved. And on this day, I will never forget that. I will never forget that Jesus is Lord. And so I know you guys are speaking about vision. I know we're talking about what is vision? How can we have vision? What are we visioning for? And I'm inspired, honestly. I'm on a Zoom call with people that are international, right? You guys were praying that we could have stable internet, and that really impacted me because, you know, it's such a luxury in America to have internet, right? It's such a luxury, and oftentimes we can take it for granted. And so I want to look at a passage here, but first, let's look at Mark 8. We could go to Mark 8. As we turn there, I was told, I have a friend of mine, he's Nigerian, and he told me in Nigeria, they have the best jollof rice. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you guys differ, if you guys think you guys have the best jollof rice, but I love jollof rice. It's awesome.
We have the best. We have the best.
You have the best jollof rice?
Yes, sir.
Is this Ghana?
Ghana is the best jollof.
Wow, man. I don't know, man. Every time I ask, everyone else says they have the best. I'm not so sure. But this is Mark 8, verses 31. Does anyone want to read it? Or I can read it if anyone doesn't, right? Could I pick on someone here to read it? Ryan? Is that Ryan?
Yes, please.
Hey, how you doing, Ryan? Could you read this for us? Mark 8, verses 31 to 32.
Yes, please. All right. Mark 8, 31 to 32. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Mark 8, 31 to 32. I'm reading again. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks for reading that for me, Ryan. And my whole premises on going to this passage is just like I just shared with you guys, that for myself, I had to take some sort of responsibility of my own life, right? And Jesus, he's teaching the disciples, he's like, this is something that I'm going to embrace for you guys, right? I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be rejected by people. I'm going to suffer and I'm going to die, right? And Peter didn't really understand what he was saying and got upset, but Jesus corrected him, right? In the same way that Jesus took ownership of what he wanted to do, he did that because he had a purpose, right? He did that because he had a vision in mind in his head looking forward. And today I really want to discuss how Jesus set a great example, right? Jesus' example was that we must look forward, right? Even though in the midst of when people can't understand, right? People don't know, we know because we have a plan. And we want to own up to this day, right? Let me show you guys again, this day, right? I'm not so sure for you guys on what day you were baptized or what day you came to, know Christ. But on this day, I had vision. I was like, man, I no longer live like how I used to, right? My whole vision has changed. What I see in front of me is different, right? And my purpose, right? My whole purpose is Jesus. Jesus, he casted a vision. Peter didn't understand it, right? But let's keep going. Let's keep following, right? Because baptism is a beautiful moment, guys. When you get baptized and we say Jesus is Lord, that's such a beautiful moment where we can be united with Christ, death, and his resurrection. However, if we desire to take charge and have vision, to look out into this world and really vision for the lost, really have an idea of what we can do to take charge and own, we must own it, right? And what I believe we must do is focus on the way of the cross, right? We must focus on the way of the cross. I don't know about you guys, but you can drop some comments in the chat. You can unmute yourself and speak. I'd love engagement if you want. But Jesus, he says, we must focus on the way of the cross, right? When we look back at Mark 8, that's what Jesus was describing, right? Jesus was describing the way of the cross. And the way of the cross is so different from what we know, right? It's so different to what I was taught. It's so different from what the world knows. Jesus said he must suffer, be rejected, and die, and raise again. Not for himself, but for mankind. Well, that only happened because God had a vision and a dream. Jesus visioned, God visioned for you so that maybe one day you can get to know him, right? And it's so inspiring to hear that, right? But Peter didn't catch the dream, right? Peter didn't understand this dream. And I'm so excited to say that I'm grateful that I get to see God's dream, his vision being lived out through me, right? And I'd love to share a story with you guys. I'd love to share a story with you guys. Sorry, I got distracted here. I'd love to share a story, which is when I first got to college, right? When I first got to college, I moved in 2016, 2015, I first moved to college, and my mom, she was amazing, and I left. And then probably 2 years later, she began to get mentally ill, right? She had a mental depression and she just was losing herself. And it broke my heart sincerely. And I lost a lot of focus. I lost a lot of drive. I lost a lot of tenacity. I lost a lot of things that I wanted to do, right? School, I wasn't really doing school. I didn't want to work. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to talk to no one because my mom was in this place where she just was struggling. And come to realize that I, sat down, spoke to some guys, and then I got baptized. And in that moment, I realized, right? I realized how when we vision for something, it can change your whole perspective, right? When we vision for something, it can change our whole outlook, right? And let's keep looking at it here. And my whole point is this. This is my whole point, right? My whole point is this. Let's keep reading up until 34, because Jesus explains what we should do, right? In verse 34, I'll read that for us. He says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me, right? He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And the whole reason why I sit here and I express this to you guys is because in order for us to have vision in others and for others, we must own up and follow the way of the cross for ourselves first. We must take that accountability that we have with our personal walk with Christ day in and day out. And this is how we do it. This is the formula. Jesus says we must deny ourselves, take up our cross and follow me. Is that something today that we still want to live out? Right? Is that something today that we still desire to follow? Do I want to be someone who dies to my old self, who dies to my old ways because of God's vision for me? Am I still seeking to follow that way of the cross? Because if not, we get misconstrued. We start to lose focus. We start to vision elsewhere, right? And I think it's so important that we take heed to what Jesus is saying. Because you see, Peter in verses 32, Peter didn't understand what Jesus was saying. Are we people who don't understand? Right? Are we people who don't understand what Jesus is saying in this day and age? Right? And what's so cool is that we can understand him by following his word and taking that ownership for who we are with him. Does that make sense? Right? And so let's keep going here, because Jesus, he says it right here, that we must deny ourselves, pick up our cross and follow him, right? But let's see a great example, because in order for us to do it, we must know who did it first, and it was Jesus. Jesus took an accountability to a level that is so radically different, right? Look at these passages. If you're taking notes and you're writing this down, look at these passages that shows how Jesus connected with God because he wanted to follow the way of the cross. He wanted to connect with God's vision, his dream for him first before he can cast it out. Let's look at this real quick. Right here, right? In Luke 5, verses 16. Check out the verbiage. Look at the language that is listed here. Let's look at this verbiage. Luke 5:16, it says, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, right? Mark 1, verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went to a solitary place where he prayed. But let's pause right there. It says Jesus often withdrew. This is something that Jesus did consistently. He consistently followed the way of the cross, wanting to die to himself, connect to the Father, right? Mark 1:35. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a quiet time. Anyone? You can unmute yourself and say, yeah, quiet time. Has anyone ever heard of a quiet time? Maybe. But a quiet time, right? But they say, oh, did you have your quiet time? Oh, did you read your Bible or something like that? We call it quiet time sometimes here. They said, did you have a quiet time? Did you connect with Jesus, right? And where did that come from? Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, quiet time. Jesus went to a solitary place to pray. Solitary, it's quiet. No one's bothering you. It's a solitude. So he can connect with the Father, right? And what I love so much, this is different things that Jesus did, right? But in John 15, it shows us his heart. It shows us why and where's his motive. Let's look at it. It says, John 15, verse 10, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. That's so beautiful. Jesus, he says, just as I, right? Just so as we seek to follow the way of the cross, just as we want to focus on the way of the cross, we have Jesus, who's a great example because he did it, right? Just as he followed his Father's commands. Does that make sense to us today? Right? And so what's really cool is that we see Jesus' example, right? We want to own up to who we are, right? So first and foremost, if we desire to be people who don't only just live a purposeless life and have vision, we got to focus on the cross, right? We got to focus on the cross, right? Jesus had a great idea, Jesus. But now what do we do about it? We focus on the cross. What do we do? What must we do? And this is my second point, guys. I think something that's super important is that in order for us to really focus on the way of the cross and cast vision, we have to own it. We have to take ownership, right? We have to own it like it's ours. We have to own it like we want it. We have to own it like we want to see it every single day. We don't want to miss a day without owning it, right? And my biggest reason why was because Jesus owned it until death, right? We see Jesus had ownership up until death. Jesus owned his purpose. He owned this way of the cross. He owned this lifestyle. He owned what he was saying all the way up until death. What a vision, what purpose, what ownership, right? To own it until death. I don't know about you guys, but that really inspires me. It gives me an understanding of how much Jesus cares for us, right? Because that was his vision. That was his whole goal. His goal was to see humanity come to him, be saved. But before he did that, he had to follow the cross and own it. And my question is today, are you guys owning it, right? Are you owning up to that decision you made, right? Are you owning up to when you got baptized? Are you owning up to what you said with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, so that you can have a vision that is changing ever so often, right? And what I think is so cool is there's this examples that we have of when we have ownership and when we don't have ownership, right? And look at this diagram here, right? When we have a lack of ownership versus owning it, right? When you own it, you're driven, you have vision, right? You really see things outside of just yourself. You want to dream for things in this world that are just beautiful, right? When I own it, I'm purposeful. When I own it, I want to keep going and never stop, right? When I own it, I'm on fire for following his example. When I own it, I'm like, man, everything I do, I want to do it right by God. Everything I do, I want to do it right by him because I'm owning it, right? Third, says zealous. We want to be zealous. We want to be active. We want to be people who are lively, people who live in the light just like he did. And it's a priority. When you own it, it's something that's important to you. How important is visioning for God in your lives? Is that something you do only when people ask you? What vision do you have, right? And it's interesting because the opposite is scary. On the left-hand side here, this part, it says when you don't have ownership, you have a lack of drive, lack of vision. You're not driven. You don't want to see good things done. You're slow to get after following Jesus. His example doesn't really matter. It's not a priority to you. It's not important, right? It means that you're stagnant. You're slow to grow. You're staying in the same spot, right? And that's the opposite of what we see in Jesus because Jesus owned it. Jesus owned it, right? And my thought today is we can have vision when we own it. What are your visions? What do you vision? I know a vision for me is a couple things. I have a couple visions. One, I love to see people changing, right? But also my vision in campus ministry is to see people grow in their love for Christ and deepen their conviction. Grow in their love, impact others, but also deepen their conviction. I have a vision to see Haitians coming to Christ, right? I have vision to see Haitian Americans looking more like Jesus. I'm Haitian myself, and I grew up in a Haitian household where it's so common. It's so common for someone to say, yes, I'm a Christian, but don't live by the word. It's so common for us to say, yeah, I'm a disciple, but this is not my standard. So I have a vision. I have a dream that I really want to see Haitians living by this. I want to be used by God. But in order for me to be used, I got to own it. In order for that vision to really cast out, I got to pray and own it. What visions do you guys have? Right? I'd love if you guys can text in the text box in the chat, or if you can get off mute and share a vision that you guys have. I don't know if anyone has any visions, but I'd love to hear some visions you guys have.
Can I?
Yeah, what's your name?
David.
David, what's up, David? David.
Fine. So my vision, especially for this year, is bring my friend to church, evangelize them, talk to them about Jesus, proclaim the goodness of Jesus in my life to them, and study the Bible and see them change their lifestyle and see them following Christ. So that's the vision around.
Yeah, that's a great vision, David. I think about every single day I wake up, I try to pray, man, God, I just want to see people know you. I just want to see people know God. I want to see people come to know God, right? Anybody else got any other visions? Anyone else? Great stuff, David. I love that. See if anyone texted in the chat box here. Would anybody else like to share any visions? No? Well, that's awesome. And so I think kind of like what David was sharing, I think we see God's vision for this world. God had a dream for humanity, right? And his dream was that everyone could be saved. I'm gonna read this passage for you guys in Acts chapter 17. If you have a Bible, you can go there in Acts chapter 17. Verses 24. It says this right here, Acts 17, verse 24. We'll keep reading up until 28. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked appointed times in his history and the boundaries of their lands. And this is why God did it. This was his vision right here in verse 27. I love it. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. This is God's vision for humanity. He says he did this so that we can seek him and find him. Guys, if we don't own up, if we don't take ownership, we won't have vision. If we're not driven, we won't want to see it come to fruition, right? And I really want to end you guys off with this topic right here. Oh, no, right here is a vision will simply be an idea if we don't own it. Your vision will only be an idea in your mind if you don't take action. Your vision will only be an idea if we're not praying, if we're not connecting very early in the morning, if we're not following the way of the cross and owning it. Our idea won't go anywhere. And it's so sad because so many people have ideas but don't do nothing. And it simply stays an idea. And it is not a vision that is casted and seen come into fruition, because we serve a God that is possible of doing anything. And guys, I really urge you that if we want to cast out and see this vision, and it's not just going to stay an idea, we must focus on the way of the cross. We must own up to who we are with Jesus, right? But also, we must own it like Jesus did. Because like I said, the vision will only be an idea, right? The vision will only be an idea if we don't own it. So let's be people who own up to this vision so we can see it and not just only think it. Amen. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Lee. I think before I get to ask who want to share about anything, Andy said in the meeting chat that his vision is to continually fall in love with God and his word, do so his will. So he wants to love others as Christ loved them by telling them about Jesus and showing them his word as he put it into practice. He said he wants to be able to change the world from his honor. And Senior said his vision is to get someone baptized before leaving his campus in Kumasi. So that's the kind of vision the guys have in the meeting chat. So can the person talking can mute himself? So yeah, so I was saying